The following is a presentation of the Match Talk Podcast Network.
Defense Soap revolutionized athletic hygiene in 2005 with the introduction of a bar soap containing natural ingredients proven to be effective against skin infections common to wrestlers. Today, Defense Soap leads the world in sports hygiene innovation with a complete line of bar soaps, shower gels, and body wipes that contain high-grade tea tree, eucalyptus, and peppermint oils. Defense Soap. Defend what you have built at DefenseSoap.com. Hello, wrestling fans. It's time for the World Wrestling Resource Podcast. The World Wrestling Resource was made that you as a wrestler, parent, coach, or fan can have access to all the resources of the very best in the world of wrestling. I'm three-time wrestling writer and broadcaster of the year, Jason Bryant, and I want you to join me, along with John McGovern and world champions Terry Brands and Dennis Hall, as we talk training tips, topical discussion, mental preparation, and more on the World Wrestling Resource Podcast. World Wrestling Resource is sponsored by Defense Soap. Find World Wrestling Resource on Facebook at facebook.com/World Wrestling Resource and follow us on Twitter at WWRESO. And, of course, on the web at worldwrestlingresource.com. Now on to the show as we join John McGovern, Terry Brands, and Dennis Hall. Episode 65 of the World Wrestling Resource Podcast. Getting ready for the Junior World Championships coming up in September in Slovakia and the Senior Worlds again in Budapest, Hungary. One of the men who shot Budapest back in 2013, our guest today, and I say shot not in a wrestling sense, but a shot in a photographer's sense, Tony Rotundo from WrestlersAndWarriors.com and one of the finest wrestling photographers in the world. Tony, overdue.
Jason.
Overdue, man.
Yeah. I won't dispute that. Wrestling photographers need love too, and so thank you very much for the opportunity. Happy to be here and excited about talking about international wrestling and particularly from a photographer's viewpoint.
Tony also has some international wrestling experience of his own. We'll get to that in a minute. But Tony actually made an appearance on the network. Of course, the World Wrestling Resource Podcast, part of the Matt Talk Podcast Network. And Tony made an appearance on Bonus Points, which was Richard Immel's USA Wrestling show back on February 18th, 2016. So you hadn't had a chance to go back and check that one out. That was episode 31 of Bonus Points. So MadTalkOnline.com/BP31 if you want to go back and listen to some 2-year-old Tony Rotundo anecdotes. So, Tony, we're going to jump right into it. You're a native New Yorker. You live out in California. You've been shooting wrestling for a long time. You grew up wrestling, got away from the sport, came back. That's I guess, the 24,000-foot view. But I want to zero in on your international experience first. I want to get this story out of the way. 1983, Cadet Greco World Silver Medalist. The Cadet Worlds were in Missoula, Montana. Just how does that whole scenario unfold?
Yeah, I qualified to go to this. I basically qualified at a Northeastern tournament. I had no idea that back at that time, Cadet World Championships weren't as big of a deal as they are now by any stretch of the imagination. So it was actually more of an opportunity to train and get ready for the Empire State Games, which are in New York. That was kind of a bigger deal to me, and so we got invited out to Montana for 2 weeks for a camp. And then at the end of the camp, kids rolled in from like Italy, Mexico, and just a handful of other countries. And it was like a 1 or 2 day, I think it was a 1-day tournament. And so, we did this camp, and then kind of right at the end of it, they had a tournament. And for me, I had been wrestling so much that like, it didn't even dawn on me. I guess they probably called it a world championship, but it wasn't like a real tournament. It was like it wasn't as big of a deal as you can imagine. Like we kind of just turned around from this training camp, and the next day, there were some kids from other countries that had shown up, and we wrestled them. And I had been to so many hundreds and hundreds of tournaments that it just. It really was, and then the participation level wasn't that great. Like, we had a full team, the U.S. had a full team, but the other countries didn't bring full teams. And so, yeah, it interesting. Reflecting back on it, I never ever had any inkling that I would be in the archives or anything like that. So when you pulled that up, it made me laugh pretty heartily. Made my dad laugh for sure.
Yeah, we found that a couple years ago. I can't remember even why I was searching your name in the UWW database. I think it was even the Fila era at the time. I was like, I don't know why I searched Rotundo for some reason. Boom, there it is.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, we just do searches, like Google searches, of me all the time, Jason. Maybe that's what it is.
I'm not going to throw myself into. Now, here's an interesting thing. I did a little digging on that. So you wrestled a guy. Do you actually? First of all, you remember the guy you wrestled?
It was a guy. He was from. It's funny. I did this research too. Was he from Mexico?
Colombia.
Okay, there you go. Sorry. Right, and he went on to wrestle a little bit, didn't he?
Yeah, so that you're already stealing my thunder, setting up my question. So here's the thing.
Sorry.
He finished 18th at the 1987 Freestyle Senior World Championships at 62 kilos. Who won that weight class that year?
Oh, man. He said freestyle or Greco?
Freestyle.
We wrestled Greco. Freestyle. I don't know. I'd need a lifeline. I'd call you.
I'd say call me and just say I'd call Stillwater. There's your hint. John Smith won. Yes. And what's also interesting, you go through that year, you look at the evidence like Gary Bohe representing Canada. He was 16th that year. Then Rincon, and then like the super Facebook photo tagger Terry Trillett from Belgium. He was also wrestling in that tournament. So by what is it, the distributive or transitive or I don't know, whatever. I didn't do that math stuff, but you basically softened up Rincon so John Smith could win the weight a couple years later.
That's funny. Here's how the match went: arm throw, and it was pretty much. It was like it was really a funny camp. Like I forgot who the coach was of the Greco team, but he had this thing. He just every single practice, and we had 3 a day. Everything we did was exactly the same. The warm-up was exactly the same. The drilling was exactly the same. And for some reason, like an arm throw defense didn't make it into the repertoire. And I never got an offense going. I don't know. I don't know what I was thinking about, but it wasn't a glorious match. It was a bit of a bit of a downer because it was one of those deals where you get off the mat and going like, what the heck just happened? You see wrestlers do that and you're like, how could they not know what just happened? But it's just a sort of like, how could I do that? Why didn't I get my offense? Like in that moment when you see wrestlers come off and they kind of look like, you'll see in the world's photos in 2009, Sean Bunch does something really, no offense to Sean Bunch, I love the guy, but
stupid.
He tries a cement mixer type thing. Didn't need to do it. Ends up on his back. It's pinned. The other guy does the absolute worst backflip in the history of the world. I have photos of it. But he gets up. You can see him on the mat, and he's looking over his corner like, what just happened? And, you sometimes see that, and you're like, how can a wrestler not know what just happened? But it's not just like what just happened in the last 2 seconds, but how have I lost this match? Like, how did this come about? Because I was winning, or I didn't execute my game plan. So yeah, it's interesting. One side note to this, I actually went on and got third at the Empire State Games, and so all that training did pay off. I felt very good and confident in that tournament. But wrestling Rincon, the Colombian stud, not so much.
Man, you're putting some revisionist history on this one, Mr. Rotundo. But as
I remember he was
huge. Tony,
he was so big.
You're not huge. He wasn't huge. Come on, man. Again, more revisionist history.
We're like probably 92 pounds, something like that.
I don't even want to do the kilo. 30 kilos.
Yeah,
is what it's listed as.
And I, dude, here's the thing. I was a sophomore in high school.
Yeah, he was not big, so
yeah.
Yeah.
No, it had to have been more than.
Yeah, it's got to be. I think it's probably it listed as 30 in the database. That can't be right. It'd probably be closer to 40 something. Anyway,
it's probably 48 or something
48-ish. Like 105 and a half or
42.
something like that. Yeah.
No, it was later than that. That's the thing. I was like, I'm one of those. one of those people, how, like, if the weight classes were now what they were then, like, basically if 105 was the lowest weight class, you'd be losing a lot of people. I was a 92 pound, that's cutting some weight, but I was a 92 pound sophomore. So it was probably 42 kilos, which is 92 and a half pounds. That would make sense.
That would sound in line with what then Fila had. What's also interesting, that's also, I think, the weight class the best man at my wedding wrestled at the Cadet Worlds in '98. Speaking of weddings, this is one thing. So we're getting Tony on the show to talk about, taking pictures and the art of photography at international events. And I'll be darned if a wedding doesn't get in the way of a wrestling tournament. Tony Rotundo, you're about to tie the knot. Let's just get that out of the way first. Let's say, one, congratulations. Two, come on, man, wrestling season doesn't end. How do you plan a wedding for this when the season doesn't end?
Well, you don't plan around a wrestling event like the Worlds, and the Worlds should not be at the end of October. No offense to whoever made that decision, but no, it's interesting because we would be, if they were where they will be next year and for the foreseeable future, it would be right now. We'd be at the Worlds. It's going to be like second, third week of September, right? They've made that announcement that it's kind of locked in. They're not going to float it in August or October. But yeah, sadly, I'm going to miss the Worlds this year. I'm getting married on September 22nd, and I'm going on a honeymoon for 2 weeks. And I'd have to turn around and go to Worlds about a week after I get back from my honeymoon, which if folks don't know, wrestling photography isn't my day job. It is what I do as a hobby and to give back to the sport. I work for Disney Streaming Services, which used to be an MLB company, Major League Baseball company. But yeah, not great optics to turn around a week after your honeymoon and then go back to Budapest for 10 days. So I'm going to have to miss it. It's going to absolutely, I've told my fiance, I was like, I'm going to be really irritable that week. Like, cause there's nothing more frustrating for me than missing a high-end wrestling event. Like, there are very few things that would get me to miss a wrestling event of that caliber. And unfortunately, wedding and honeymoon is one of those things. So I'm super happy. My partner is fantastic. She supports me in all things I do in my life, but especially the wrestling photography. So, I'm marrying a great woman, and super, super happy about it. The wedding's going to be fantastic, and here pretty local to San Francisco. So yeah, kind of good news, bad news. So super happy about the wedding. Super bummed that I'm going to miss the Worlds.
And before we even get into the minutia of photography, who does a photographer hire to photograph their wedding?
Great question. So a photographer photographs their fiance's friend, who's an amazing event photographer that we are getting at a very affordable rate because he's a good friend of ours. He's just really magical. He gets moments really, really well. I don't know if he's ever shot sports, but I'm sure he would be good at it. His name is Justin Winokur, and he's a good dude and a fantastic photographer. And he sets up a photo booth when he comes and shoots weddings, which is a big.
I've seen that. That's bonus. Awesome. Those things are awesome.
Yeah, because you really then get like a lot of group shots that a photographer, by the time of the reception, is tired and doesn't want to run around, and it's hard to wrangle people. And so when you have this place, like, let's go over to the photo booth, you get good results.
When we get into photography, we need to dial this back a little bit. You got away from wrestling for a while, and then we went out to California. What drew you back into the sport?
I was literally going to the gym every day and passing by Berkeley High School on my way to the gym. I'd go to the gym at lunchtime for my work, and it just dawned on me that wrestling season would have started. This was probably around 2000, and I made it a point to drop in. So it just was like I was going past this high school, and I was like, oh, I wonder what it's like. Like I really hadn't been following the sport. I really missed a lot of what was going on. I certainly heard of the Dave Schultz tragedy and stuff like that, but and I would watch the Olympics and stuff. But I was passing by the high school, and one day after work, I dropped in, and it was just crazy, like how they needed help. There were two coaches there, Brad Itakazu and Hugh Johnson. Shout out to those guys. They were doing good work. I mean, coaching wrestling in high school is extremely time consuming. It's very difficult to stay motivated, and particularly with smaller programs where you're really babysitting more than anything. And so, you're really focusing on a couple of great athletes, and then there are a lot of yokels who are just taking it sort of for intramural. So I dropped in, and they immediately were like, it was like I actually wrote up a little wrestling resume for Brad, just to be like, I'm not just off the street. And I probably neglected to mention that I was a silver cadet world champion.
Imagine that.
But he was like, yeah, sure, go out and referee. And I was like, Jesus, I don't even remember the rules. Like, referee, like the wrestle-offs or whatever. And so the other thing is I got in there on the mat, and of course, just to kind of prove my knowledge and all that, so I would get respect in the room. He put me up against a pretty good stud. And so I think I hurt my back probably permanently, like wrestling this kid. And I was like, okay, I've got to, like prove my worth in the room here. And, scrapped with the kids a little bit, but then didn't really wrestle with them too much after that season. It's very painful when I was in my 30s. So that's kind of how I got back into it, and eventually was coaching on my own. And it wasn't the right fit for me. I wanted to go see the world. I wanted to go to college tournaments. I wanted to do more with it, like even as a fan. And as a coach for a small program, like you just can't. Every weekend is tied up in tournaments and practice and stuff. So I met John Sachs, who was very local to me. He's another fantastic wrestling photographer, and he's in the same section that I was coaching in, Berkeley's North Coast section. And so I ran into him at a sectional tournament, and he was photographing, and I said, what do you do with your photos? He said, I put them on a website. And at the time, that was still a pretty novel idea. And I knew at that moment that that's exactly what I wanted to do. So I got his number, and then a year later, I coached that next season. And then at the end of the season, I called him up and said, hey, this sounds really intriguing to me. I'm going to have some time. Can I contribute some photos? And it just took off from there. It was absolutely natural fit for me. I loved it from the first second that I changed gears there a little bit. I was like, this is it. Like, I was just the happiest guy at a wrestling tournament, and very friendly, very, just lots of interactions with people. Whereas as a coach, I was just in my own head and trying to get one kid to win one match, and not being very social. And so literally overnight, it was just like, this is my thing.
Now, did you have any photography experience beforehand?
Yeah, I did. My dad was always encouraging of photography, and so he always had cameras. And so I shot a little bit in high school on film, shot for my college a little bit. So I did have some photography experience and really appreciated it, and was always interested in it. So that's kind of why it was a natural fit. It was like taking these two things that I really enjoyed and putting them together. And so it was never a struggle or a hassle. I've never bemoaned buying a piece of camera gear, and I've never bemoaned going to a wrestling tournament. So, you just kind of slam these two things together, and it made a lot of sense. Like it was one of those things in my life that, like, when he said that, it was like light bulbs went off. Like literally, I'm like, that's it. Like it was like he said, like, I photograph and put them up on a website. And I'm like, that's it. Like, I saw the future. I mean, I didn't see myself at the Olympics or anything like that, but pretty early on, I was like, I'm going to do this. I am committing to this. This is what I want to do. This is how I want to contribute. This is what's going to drive me to make an impact a little bit in the wrestling community. And it just was an easy ride, just like never questioned the amount of work that goes into it, the amount of money, the amount of travel, all that. Like, particularly at first, I was just happy as a clam. There's a ton of work. What people probably don't realize is that, getting yourself to the wrestling event and photographing the wrestling event and having the gear and having the knowledge and having the skill, that's just the first part of it. Then you get home and you have hours and hours and hours of post-processing work to do. So it's editing out, paring down one round, you might shoot 2,000 to 4,000 photos, paring it down to the top 100 photos and no more, or, not much more than that for a session. And then editing them and captioning them and posting them and stuff. It's a lot of work that, a lot of late hours, late at night, and particularly for someone who it's not, I've got on Monday mornings after the NCAAs, when everybody's just like jacked about, about the tournament, thinking about the tournament, and Flo is thinking about their broadcast, and, you're thinking about your podcast. I have to turn on a dime and get reconnected with my work. And I'm a director at like my company. So I have to like kind of drop wrestling for 8 hours. And then I get home on Monday evening from work and I'm like, charging in and trying to get photos up as quickly as possible. You know what I mean? So, yeah, it's interesting, the amount of work that goes into it, as a photographer.
One thing that podcasters get is it's gas, and I mean gear acquisition syndrome. Was that something where, you said you didn't bemoan buying gear? Is that something, do you have to watch yourself when you're a photographer?
You do. I've always made relatively calculated decisions. I believe in redundancy. I do not believe going to the World Championships with just one lens and one camera is a wise thing, because if that lens or camera fails, you're sitting in the stands. I get ribbed a little bit by some of the photographers, but they've kind of followed suit. They see the value in making sure you have redundant gear. I don't want to. I'll have three main bodies that I use. So camera bodies that I use, a multiple set of lenses. But in the moment, like if I'm shooting a match and they go to the corner and I want a wider angle shot, I don't have time to take my lens off my one main body and put a new lens on and shoot, and then take that lens off and put the other lens on. And so the idea of having redundancy and having multiple bodies and multiple lenses, that you need to move very fast. So you'll put one camera down, pick one camera up, take a couple shots, put that down, and pick the other camera up. I like gear. I like geeking out on gear. You posted something about Amazon. Like, what was your very first Amazon purchase? And mine was not wrestling or not photography gear, but I can totally see the trend of when I started discovering camera gear on Amazon, because my purchases per year went up pretty dramatically in 2005, 2006.
I think I was still buying when I made my first purchase, 2002. I think it was actually Amazon was still only books at the time.
Yeah, you're right. Actually, so and my dates are wrong. So it's more like 2007 and 2008 was when I was starting to buy cables and gadgets and stuff like that. But yeah, I have a pretty big closet full of stuff, but I use most of it. Some of it was gimmicky that I could get rid of at a garage sale or whatever, but most of it's pretty useful. I do sell gear off, and I've sold it to a number of the other wrestling photographers, trying to give them good deals and stuff. My primary camera is usually the latest and best camera that Nikon puts out. And then what I'll do is if I have three cameras, I'll buy the newest, and then I'll sell the oldest and kind of cover maybe half the cost, maybe. But I just see this as part of it's part of the process. I mean, people say gear doesn't make a photographer, and that's not entirely true. It is true that a great photographer will find good light. But when you're looking at, weirdly lit, low lit high schools and weirdly lit, world championships, you really do need high end cameras and lenses. I mean, to get great shots, particularly with high action. So, yeah, it's an investment of time and of money and knowledge, and there's kind of no really getting around that at the highest level.
There's so many different ways we can go on this. One thing we need to get back to is the wrestling. We can go gear happy. We can go tech happy. I'm more than happy to do that, but wrestling folks around the world, like, wait a minute, we're talking about shooting wrestling around the world. So you have shot wrestling around the world, and I'm curious on how you went from, meeting John Saxon gang, that's what I want to do, to the 2009 World Championships in Herning, Denmark. We've got a lot we can talk about on the college scene, but since we're talking shooting internationally brings a whole lot of different challenges that you don't get shooting in St. Louis. So for the NCAA championships, for example. So let's take us through, how does 2009 make its way through your world, which actually coincidentally 2009, 2010, you were the National Wrestling Media Association Photographer of the Year, and an organization which you actually hold an officer role as you are the treasurer, but you actually haven't had the checkbook at all since you've had that role. But let's get back to 2009 before I get off tangent again.
Yeah, it was so the situation was in 2007. I was too green to go to the Worlds. Were they in Baku?
That was my first trip. Yeah, that was Baku.
Yeah. So I was too green. I hadn't been shooting enough to make that trip worthwhile. And then 2008 was the Olympics. I pitched for me to get an Olympic credential in 2008, but I was just a little too green to USA Wrestling staff, and so I didn't get tapped for the 2008 Olympics. So then by 2009, I was like, I'm going. They could have been underwater. I would have gone to them. Like I didn't care. So Herning, Denmark, never heard of it, but I love to travel. So that's one really nice thing, is I love traveling. Like I love exploring different cultures and different worlds. So it's like, middle of Denmark, sure, why not? Let's do it. I found a Airbnb before Airbnb existed. I don't know what it was, but I
couch
stayed in
surfing,
somebody's apartment. Yeah, it was couch surfing, but I stayed in somebody's apartment in Herning, Denmark for the first while. Then I moved to a hotel, but I was just over the moon. I loved it. It was funny. I thought for sure there would be great shooting positions, and I walked in the first day, and they literally hadn't thought about where the photographers would go. And so we were down on the floor behind the table and behind the coaches and the athletes. And, for your podcast listeners, I'm not the tallest person in the room ever. So I'm pretty short. And so I knew I would be in trouble. And Danny Felix's family had seats that were like in the first row, kind of dead center. And so they had extra seats and let me sit there, and I shot basically from the stands, but I got some good stuff because the stands in Herning were, that first row was pretty level with the mat. So got some good stuff there. It was exciting. I was definitely over my head in terms of like the processing of photos, and like how to edit, how to process very quickly. I was trying to get photos up to Mike Finn at Win Magazine, and I think I frustrated him because it just took me forever to kind of get through which photos I wanted to give to him and get them to him and stuff. But it was thrilling to be there. Very, very eye-opening. I hadn't been to I'd only been to like the highest level tournament at that time I would have shot was the 2008 Olympic team trials. So I had never been to the World, and it was just eye-opening. It was fascinating for me and really, really fun. Jake Herbert got second. He beat Gatisov, right, in the semis, which was crazy. The men's freestyle team was happy with that performance. I remember hanging out with them. There were only 2 bars in Herning, Denmark, and so it was easy to run into people.
And which one of those, I think, was kept open by an American who was paying the bar to keep it open because everything closes at like 9 o'clock with a $38 hamburger. Cleanest place I've ever been, by the way.
Yeah, Herning, yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Yeah, so a great time. Definitely, like, want to do that again. So in 2010, Moscow, and I'm like, man, who wouldn't want to go to Moscow for wrestling? So another great time. That time was wild as the photographers. They tried to wrangle. We were kind of in the first row of stands, but still at the floor level. And the people, the fans would ignore the sort of security. And when there were big moments, like Russians winning, they would all run kind of toward the mat and get in our way. And but super, super exciting, great trip to Moscow. Yeah.
No, we
went to Moscow, I assume.
Yeah. I've been in every one since 07 was not in 08, but 9 consecutively, all the way now. And as we head to Budapest. Now, one thing that I've always kind of I've probably, I guess, assumed is when you're a wrestler and you've got a camera and you're shooting wrestling, you can have that anticipation maybe a little bit better than, there's great photographers that work for Gannett and the Associated Press and things like that. Do you feel like you've got an advantage over them in those situations?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, totally. I mean, it's not even just like, which way is this guy going to turn on when he's finishing that double, but it starts way further upstream from that. It's who are these athletes? What's the story behind this match? And I love wrestling. Like I geek out on it. I listen to all the blogs, I read a lot of blogs and like stuff that's posted. I listen to the podcast. I'm like second behind Julia Slaughter in terms of like wrestling knowledge. A little shout out to her, and I'm kind of kidding because her wrestling knowledge is off the hook. But so knowing who the matchups are, like where is the drama going to be? Why is this an exciting match? And then specifically on the match, like, if I know those guys and I know what they have tendencies of doing, I'll remember that. And that's come into play. Like I've turned to other photographers, like at the Olympics and stuff, and say, watch, this guy's going to hit, like whatever, arm throw. And
always comes back to the arm throw, doesn't it?
Totally. At the Olympics, it was pretty funny because, as you said, I mean, these are fantastic photographers. They're getting great shots, but they don't know the sport that well. It would be like, you going and, well, a lot of sports, but, going and photographing, or me going and photographing like team handball. I'd be like, why? What's the drama here? I don't get it, or something like that. So, yeah, it would be fun to kind of educate those guys, and you gain a little bit of respect. Like your seat, all of a sudden is there the next day because they're like, oh, this guy really knows the sport and is passionate about the sport and stuff. But yeah, the anticipation, it's a common question, and it certainly helps. You can learn that. It's not to say that a person who's never wrestled wouldn't make a great photographer, but I think it's an advantage for sure. And it certainly makes it very fun, like I know why this match is exciting. I know the history of these wrestlers, or, and that sort of thing. And when I don't, I get really frustrated because later I'm like, I should have known. But yeah, the anticipation definitely is helpful to get good shots. And then sometimes you just get lucky.
When we talk about the Olympics, and that is something, and you said you're a little green, and for those who want to know how it works in the United States, all media has to go through the USOC's media credentialing system. And in this case, we got the application for 2020 like recently. So we're talking a year and a half out. So, the 200-day mark, they start looking at credentials. So, if you're new on the scene in 07 trying to get an 08, sorry, you've missed the deadline. Now, moving towards 2016, you got the opportunity to go to Rio. What was that process like? And when you got the thumbs up that you were going to be one of the few American photographers there in the wrestling facility, what was going through your mind?
Yeah, the process was I got past. So it starts like a lot of my stories. It starts a little bit earlier. So in 2012, as you remember, the Olympics were in London, and the issue there is that because it was London, everybody wanted a credential. No one didn't want a credential, and so that put a cap on how many credentials could go out. So. And for wrestling, it's been in the past 3 or 4 credentials. For London, wrestling only got 2 credentials that they could approve. And unfortunately, through seniority, I was in line behind John Sachs and Larry Slater. So I did not go to London, even though I think there were a lot of people in the room that felt I was qualified. But I respect the decision because you got to pay your dues, and seniority is important. But I had conversations with the communication staff at USA Wrestling because obviously I was disappointed, and I had reasonable assurances that I would probably get a credential for Rio. So I had 4 years to prove my worth, to knuckle down and really work very hard to make sure they realized that should that opportunity come along, I wouldn't let them down. I kind of rehearsed like what I was going to say to them when I got the approval, but it didn't work out that way. I didn't cry, but man, I was pretty close to it. It was basically just I received an email from the USOC that was basically like, congratulations, your credential has been approved, and then lots of details. And, I certainly took a very, very long moment to enjoy that and to recognize like that's a goal and a dream, and that's just a lot of hard work. It was very exciting. It was really a dream come true. It was a proud moment, proud phone call, to my parents.
There's some things.
Yeah, it was great.
There are some things about 2016 we'll get into, and then we'll pick to some questions here that have come in. Of course, we answered the one from Mark Lundy. We also had one that I wasn't quite I couldn't remember who asked it, but if your house is on fire, your computer is crashed, what 3 pictures do you take with you? Yeah.
Well, I think we'd spoken that you can post. Why don't we post these 3 pictures of the three links of the 3 pictures in your show notes? It's tricky. It's kind of a trick question. It's a bit of a Dwight Schrute question. What I would do is
Black Bear. Next question.
I have all of my photos on multiple hard drives, and they're in different locations. So I have one at work and one at home. I have all my Olympics on solid state hard drives, all my Olympic photos on solid state thumb drives. They're both at work and at home. The only step I haven't taken, which I have seriously considered, is a safe deposit box. So, houses on fire, I don't necessarily have to grab 3 photos, but I totally appreciate the question. And let me answer it by saying that John Sachs and I had a conversation once about wanting to shoot 5 great timeless photos, 5 photos that, you don't even need to be a wrestling fan to really appreciate them, and they will stand the test of time. Like even in 100 years, assuming the sport is still around, they will appreciate and get it. And so 2 of those I have. One is Kyle Dake from the NCAA's against Montel Marion, which was in 2010. Keep me honest here. Didn't put the date.
Pretty sure that would have been 10 because Ryan Williams from ODU was in the finals in 2009, and Dake was at the same weight next year, so it would have been 2010.
Yeah, and
Dake on the U.S. World Team, by the way.
Yeah, which we're going to get to in a second. Stop me if I'm rambling, but he's shooting head on the outside, high crotch. His left hand is making contact with Marion's right leg, and his right hand is way up in the air, kind of like he's throwing off Marion's overhook. But he's charging hard with his left foot, which is up in the air, and his right foot is super extended. So he's like taking this really, really deep shot, and it just, to me, I just really love that shot. And I will, this is a bit of a sidebar, but I was sick as a dog at that finals. I had the stomach flu that was going around at that world champion, or that NCAA championships. A lot of the media folks got sick, and I rallied to make it to the finals, which possibly wasn't going to happen.
That would have been Omaha, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I got sick the next day.
Sense.
Yep.
Yeah, a lot of people did. It was bad. People were like leaving the finals like to go be ill, but really got it, and was really happy I got this great shot. Second one is from the 2015 Pan Am Games in Toronto, and it's not U.S. wrestlers. It's a Venezuelan wrestler. So it's Pan Am's. So and what is TRC?
Costa Rica.
Costa Rica. Thank you. In a bronze medal match, and the funny story about that is I was sitting on a bench waiting for the finals to start, and I was talking and chatting with a local newspaper reporter, and he was kind of talking my ear off, and I was half paying attention to the bronze medal matches, but I had my camera on a monopod, sitting in front of me with my hand kind of on the button, just holding it, and we're talking and chatting. And sometimes when a big move happens, like all the air in the room, I think it's kind of like this giant inhale before a big move happens. It's sort of like before a baby cries, there's this like moment of silence as they're like taking in a lot of air, and then something really, they cry for the next 20 minutes. And so in a wrestling tournament, you've seen this, I know, is like there's this moment where it builds up. So guy is shooting a double. The Venezuelan is shooting a double, and he's coming around and he's lifting him, and you kind of can sense that something's going to happen. And I'm sitting there and I'm like starting to look, but not fully looking through my viewfinder as the guy's talking to me. And lo and behold, the Venezuelan just leaps in the air. So he's facing the frame, and he's got this double, and both of the wrestlers are probably 2 or 2.5 feet off the mat, clearly, and it's a crisp shot, like absolutely crisp, clean shot. I didn't shoot I didn't shoot many of the photos. I didn't hold down the trigger that much. I just probably shot 3 shots. The ref is kind of still in the picture. He's got kind of a funny look on his face, like, oh, what just happened? And so those two I definitely would take with me. The third one's a bit of a toss-up. There are a lot.
There's thousands and thousands and thousands you could probably say. All right, let's try that one.
Yeah.
Does it involve a Mongolian?
Yeah. No, that is a fantastic set of photos, and if the Mongolian protest, if you go check out the Olympic photos on my website, that is one of the craziest moments I've ever witnessed in sport. Totally insane. But the photo the third photo is off mat photo of Icho. So Icho won the Olympics. It was her 4th, right? And where I was sitting, so she's a Japanese wrestler, and obviously I don't think I need to explain who she is and her achievements, but where the photographers were sitting in relation to where the fans were, we were just in front of the fans, or at least I was. There were benches kind of all around, but I was right in front of the fans. And when the wrestlers won, they would kind of leap over these cardboard stands in front of us and jump over the bench and leap into the arms of their fans and family and stuff that was right behind us. And as a photographer, it's chaos. I mean, we're literally dropping our gear. people are stepping on gear. It's just madness, but you want to get that shot because there's just a ton of emotion. And so Icho came right at me. And I mean, like literally right at me and stepped right next to me. And instead of trying to catch the shot, like by standing on the bench and turning around and catching it over, I followed her and went like kind of underneath where she was standing. And so I have a photo of her looking up at her fans, and someone had given her a photo of her mother who had passed away a year before. And so somehow the angle worked where it's fans, a photo of her mother, and Icho looking at the photo and getting teary-eyed, and it all made it in the shot. And so that moment it's probably my favorite Olympic photo, just because of the story behind it and the sort of luck kind of involved in being in that moment, deciding without really thinking about it too much that I was gonna kind of like go under the scene instead of shooting it from over the scene, you know.
As we go to the big events, you know, we're recording this on September 11th, and you know that's obviously an important day for not just Americans, but our allies around the world. And traveling with this gear has been different. My wife and I were talking about this today. Like, you know, that 17 years ago, there are people that are going to be in college next year that weren't born when 9/11 happened, and we were talking like, the first time I ever got on a plane to go to Fargo, I went as somebody else's name. I was Gary Alcon on the way to Fargo. I was Jason Cox on the way back. But that doesn't happen now. And then with all this technology, we have to go through security and whatnot. It can be a bit of a burden to bring all this gear through a TSA checkpoint leaving the United States. I mean, what are some of the hassles with bringing so much gear, and how many times do you get stopped and that thing has to go through again and again and again through a checkpoint?
Yeah, domestically, it's pretty good because most airports have the correct X-ray systems that will like determine that a camera is a camera and not something, you know, nefarious or dangerous or anything like that. So domestically, it's pretty good. I definitely signed up for TSA Pre, which is super helpful. I don't check anything because I just don't trust it. I also kind of getting back to your GAS thing, I don't want to carry more than like one rolly bag of gear, and that does mess me up if I want to bring a change of clothes because, you know, I've got a book bag which has my computer, and then a rolly bag literally full of camera gear. So if I want to bring a change of clothes, I do have to check a bag, but it will be clothing. Internationally, it's kind of the same deal. I don't ever check anything, and so I take it as carry-on. Just recently, coming back from Worlds in Paris, I got stopped, got very, very, very hassled about the weight of my bag, which had never occurred to me before, and which made zero sense to me. So here, let me run down this logic. The bag could be checked and go on the plane, or the bag could be brought on as carry-on and go on the plane, and somehow the weight of the bag being checked versus carry-on makes a difference. I'm like, what? That makes zero sense. Like, if you're telling me it can go, like, the weight's the same. It's on the plane. You know, whether it's like in an overhead bin or in the check, you know, luggage thing, it makes no difference. So that can be a hassle that people have to look out, and it's something for sure that I need to look out for. It depends on the airline. Some airlines are just, you know, don't care. Some airlines do. Definitely international travel, they care more about the weight of your gear. And, you know, I was like, no joke, I was like 40 pounds over the limit. Like, I'm like, what do you want me to do? There's nothing I can do here. And yeah, it was a little bit harrowing for a second, but I got through. We came up with a creative solution. I took like all non-essential stuff off. I like basically checked my book bag. Like the woman was like, what if you check that? I'm like, well, it's got my computer. She's like, well, what if you put your computer in with your camera gear? And I'm like, I will compromise with you for sure. And so we filled up my book bag and checked that. And I was still like 30 pounds over the limit. And she's like, okay. And I'm like, yeah, all right. But yeah, in security, you just need to stay alert. Like this kind of gets back to me. I love traveling, and so I'm good. Knock on wood, I'm good in a lot of situations. Very alert to my surroundings, and you just have to be smart. You have to present yourself as there's nothing in the role. My mantra is it's only dirty laundry. Being the point being like if I'm rolling my bag down the street, like going to catch a cab or doing something like that in the middle of Budapest, I'm not trying to present myself as anything other than just a tourist who has dirty laundry in his rolly bag. You know what I mean? Like I don't have any gear labels that are like, I don't have Nikon on my bag. I don't carry my camera outside my bag when I'm carrying all that gear. And I have insurance. I pay for gear insurance, which would cover a chunk of it, probably not all of it. But it'd be a pain in the butt. But so it would be an excuse to go buy all new gear.
Oh boy, the gear acquisition syndrome again. This one,
there you go.
Yeah, this one involves. I want to speak, internationally. Tony Hager from iWrestle and Takedown Radio asked the best and worst facilities he's shot in and why.
Oh man, that's a great question. I'm trying to think. You put me on the spot.
Usually that's what an interview does, Mr. Rotundo.
No, yeah, no,
hey, I didn't even have any prep on this one. This one came on as we started recording, so
yeah. I was hoping the best would be the Olympics, and it wasn't. We were on benches that were pretty low, and there weren't a lot of spots, so that was super disappointing. That was one thing I was like, the Olympics finally, because every Olympics up to that point they had like beautiful seating, and no one was hassling for spots and stuff, and the Olympics were a bit of a disappointment. I had to hustle pretty hard to get the shooting. I had to show up very early to get the shooting position I wanted. The worst is probably the worst is the casino south of the Vegas Strip that the USA Wrestling keeps going to.
South
rodeo,
was it South Point?
South Point. I swear that's like my nemesis. Like Tony Hager, like that facility is so frustrating to shoot in. So I wouldn't say that's the worst. The worst is a gym somewhere up here in the North Coast where they decided they were going to do a spotlight, but it was like a 100-watt light bulb over the center of the mat. That was probably the worst, or just like not lit at all. And you use a flash, but it's just, everything's kind of ugly. So yeah. And best, trying to think where the best. NCAA's is usually pretty good, though we've got our own hassles. Actually, I take that back because we have to shoot across 8 mats. I don't know the best. I don't know.
I'm just curious, where does Madison Square Garden stack up? Because that has hosted a World Championships. We can tie the NCAAs into a World Championship venue.
Yeah, I enjoyed Madison Square Garden. I enjoyed New York. A lot of people didn't. They thought it was too expensive and stuff. But I thought it was good. Good over. I got a couple good overhead shots. It was pretty cramped for the photographers. Just to break it down for you guys, what you probably don't realize is because it's 8 mats and they only have a certain width, they stick the wrestlers on the ends, and so we're seated on the ends. And so for the quarterfinals, we're trying to shoot with people and mats right in front of us, and then we're trying to shoot across 2 or 3 mats to get all of the matches. And that's probably one of the most frustrating rounds to shoot, because we have to, there not only is there a ref in your way, there's potentially 2 or 3 refs in your way, plus wrestlers, plus coaches and stuff. I'm looking forward to Minnesota and I know that some people are kind of down on it, but it's going to be one time where we're going to have ample floor space. It'll be really interesting to see what they do, particularly for the photographers and other media, where they're in the the football arena, right? And they're just going to have tons of floor space for us. So that could be fun. I heard that in the past, the NCAA's, they split the center two mats and had a walkway where photographers could sit. And everybody's kind of chattering about how great that would be. So NCAA's can be a little frustrating in that regard. But yeah, maybe the biggest thing, my biggest frustration right now is that the California State High School championships, which are one division, so it's a fantastic state tournament. It's absolutely epic. The first round, the first day, they won't let any photographers on the mat because a company called Max Preps, who you're probably all aware of, owns the right. And so photographers, even media photographers like myself and John Sachs, cannot get on the floor for that. And I literally have to shoot from the stands. So people getting up and getting popcorn. I've got all this gear, and I'm shooting from the stands, parents jumping up in front of me and stuff. So that's one of my biggest frustrations right now. And there's not much they can do. I'm not faulting anyone. It is what it is. People pay money and they get spots, but that's a little frustrating.
Yeah, I won't even go into the issues we've had in Minnesota with our state high school league because they've shut out some really good photographers for similar reasons. Now, moving forward, what do you think, and this is another question from Tony, and I think it's a good one too, is what do you think was that first big break that got you into the discussion where people say great wrestling photographers, and you're usually one of the first ones that come out of their mouths?
Probably Herning, because for whatever reason, I don't know that there were. I know John Sachs wasn't at Herning. I don't know if Larry Slater was there. So I think Herning was really kind of the breakthrough because a lot of people were relying on me for photos. So Mike Flynn used a lot of my photos in Win magazine. I'm pretty sure that Jason, you guys probably used my shots.
With USA, I was at USA Wrestling. Actually, I wasn't even at USA Wrestling at the time, believe it or not, because Gary didn't make that trip because he was in grad school, so I was basically his proxy. I got hired 3 months later at USA Wrestling, even though I was working for them there. We definitely used a lot for the stuff that we were doing for social media. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think the 08 U.S. team Olympic team trials, I did pretty well. I got some good shots there, and I got to know Gary. Gary remembered me because I literally didn't know the rules of where photographers / media could go. I've always seen myself. I don't necessarily see myself as media. I see myself as just an extension of the USA Wrestling. So like I'm like kind of there with the athletes and the coaches, and it's frustrating for me at times where I get, you're just media. Go over here. You can't have access to this. So there was what they were doing an interview with Clarissa maybe or somebody, and I just kind of ran over there because that's where a photo op is, and I totally broke the rules of where media can go. And Gary ran over and grabbed me, and he was pretty polite, but I remember John Sachs rolled his eyes pretty good when that happened. Because he's like, oh, geez, you're getting in trouble. And I'm like, I didn't know. And I think Gary remembered me after that. But I got some good shots at the OTT. And, the other thing is I think just the volume of work. Like I really, really dove into it in 07 and 08. I was shooting a lot of high school, shooting college, and just producing stuff and kind of getting it to people, getting it to the folks putting on the tournament, giving it to USA Wrestling, giving it to the magazines. So I think those were kind of the marquee events that probably got me recognized.
One thing that we haven't discussed yet is I want to know your reaction, because I had gone to the Worlds in 07, so I'd seen it firsthand. It's basically, I don't know if there's a term for it. Maybe it's the Yoshida Icho effect or something like that, speaking about the two great Japanese women's wrestlers. But the Japanese photographers, okay, I first saw them in 2003, that's right, in New York, and they're just hoarding the mats whenever any especially it was more the women than the men too. It was like, coming off the mat, here comes Yoshida, here comes Icho, here comes Hamaguchi. It's just like, whoa. I mean, it's just a swarm. How can you explain that experience, the Japanese photography crew at a wrestling event?
Well, they're getting their shot. I mean, that's they're kind of competing against each other. We just don't have that many shooters. And I think also culturally, the crowding each other is probably a little bit more acceptable. But explain it. It is a culturally acceptable thing, at least in photography, to kind of run over each other to get a shot. I think that there's a lot of competition. I don't think that they're not doing it graciously. They're really and they're they're all working for the same. They're not all working for the same media outlet. So they're all have to, like, you get the shot, I get the shot, you get the shot, I get the shot. Like everybody's trying to get that one shot, but they will feed off each other, right? Like you probably could be like, oh, look, Icho, and half of them would just run to wherever you pointed because they all kind of like get worked up. I know from my perspective, like Gary would be like, oh, you got to look out for those Japanese photographers, and I hold my own in that scrum. I do. I'm like, I want that shot too. So I'll, you gotta hold your ground. You can't panic. You can't hassle people if they're actually not in your shot. So people can be in your physical space, but the way the barrel of your lens is pointing toward this thing, unless somebody's right in front of the barrel of the lens, they're not in your shot. So they might be in your space, but they're not in your shot. And so you gotta be a little bit like calm in that moment and be like, okay, this is gonna end in just a minute. But also there's respect too. I mean, I know a lot of those photographers, not by name, but they've seen me and they've seen my work, and everybody kind of looks over each other's shoulders as they're chimping photos, as they're looking photos, or they'll go to your website or whatever. And so I think that there's respect there. They see me at events, and you kind of know who's like a really solid shooter who really loves the sport, and who's just trying to put food on the table and get one shot and then walks off or whatever. So I think there's some respect there.
Yeah. Well, what about the I guess international diplomacy that wrestling brings? I mean, you get to know photographers from around the world. I know that our friend Sachiko from Japan, she's basically become a favorite of ours because she's just such fun to be around when she shoots for Japan and United World Wrestling, and you get to see the same faces. It's like when we go to Fargo, we see the same coaches. Here domestically, we go to the Worlds, we go to the Junior Worlds. We know we're seeing the Bob Costas of Iran doing the broadcasting. We're seeing Martin Gabor from Hungary shooting photos. I mean, what's it like to build those relationships with people that you don't always speak the same language with?
It's awesome. I mean, it's just that, again, it's that mutual respect for this great sport. People who really love the sport and get involved, and it's really fun. I wish I could see folks more. It kind of lends, one of the reasons why I'm really bummed about missing Worlds this year is that I'm going to miss spending time with people and going out for drinks afterwards and stuff. And so, yeah, it's really great. It's an important part of the whole thing. I just, a little plug, like I appreciated that, when I first started, like the idea of shooting for Fila, like I remember seeing Martin across the mat, and back when Fila was in power and or whatever, however you want to put that, I was like, I want to be that guy. Like just talking about goal setting and achieving goals and stuff like that. Like I remember seeing, I was shooting on one side and there was the Fila photographer on the other, and I was like, how do you be that guy? Like how does that work? And so then, it took years, but I've been shooting with UWW for a couple of years now, at some of the big events, World Cups and stuff like that. And it takes relationship building. It takes getting to know people. It takes just striving to put out a great product that's consistent. That if people hear that you're going to an event, they know that the good photos will come from it. And so it's a lot of work and it's a lot of care, to be great at something. And that's my plug for any up and coming photographers. It won't happen overnight. It takes a ton of work. You got to shoot a lot. You got to figure out your processing. You got to figure out, your eye, what looks good to you. And you got to put in the time and the money and learn the skills.
You can check out Tony's photos at WrestlersAreWarriors.com. We're actually going to do a special page because I realize, going through the show notes and trying to click link after link after link. Yeah, we're going to go MadTalkOnline.com/Tony Photos. He sent me a bunch of stuff in our National Wrestling Media Association Slack channel that we will throw out and put all these links up. A lot of this stuff is, of course, on WrestlersAreWarriors.com, and you can find out more from Tony post-nuptials at Tony_Rotundo on Twitter. And Tony, we know it's a busy time. Work is never done for people, but anything else you'd like to add here as we wrap up the World Wrestling Resource Podcast?
Just thanks for the opportunity. I appreciate it, Jason. Keep doing what you're doing. I love the podcast. I love the network. And I really appreciate the time. I hope it was as entertaining as some of your other podcasts. And please go check out the photos, everyone. There's some good stuff there. I pulled out for Jason kind of some of my top shots or my favorite shots from each world, from the Olympics, and then the shot that was describing earlier in the cast.
Subscribe to the World Wrestling Resource Podcast by going to WWRpodcast.com and check it out on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spreaker, or wherever you find your podcasts. World Wrestling Resource at WorldWrestlingResource.com.
This show is part of the Matt Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to MattTalkOnline.com.